And Yuri Fizzer, our global news editor, is already in the studio, and that means one thing. This is high time to talk about the global politics. So let me just tell you one thing. What except the Mr. Zelensky visit to White House has happened in the world during the last 7 days, spotlighting Ukraine? Do we have any global news?
Yes, we do, Vladimir. Well, first of all, hello. Yes, we do. And I will talk more today about Russia and Belarus, maybe unfortunately, but I will talk. So why did Putin and Lukashenko meet in Minsk this week? Do they plan a new assault against Ukraine? Is Russian army capable of new massive offensive in our country? Well, we'll talk also about the resilience of the Ukrainian people and of the Ukrainian army on the front lines. And of course, we'll talk about the help that is coming from our Western friends and partners. So this and more in my part of Spotlight Ukraine today.
Sounds great.
Yes, of course. And for the first time, Putin came to Lukashenko to Minsk. They met again, but this time President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, hosted the president of aggressor country, Vladimir Putin. They talked, according to both of them, mostly about the economy, but security issues were also on the table. Lukashenko said that the West should listen to the voice of reason and resume the dialogue on security guarantees with Russia. Whether Putin has convinced Lukashenko to involve the Belarusian army in the so-called special military operation is still unknown. We'll see. And we must be prepared for the fact that it can happen, unfortunately, Volodymyr. And administration of the U.S. President Joe Biden warned Alexander Lukashenko, warned very seriously. The United States of America is monitoring the activity of the Belarusian army. And in case of its involvement in the Russian war in Ukraine, we are ready to respond, it said the White House. This was stated during the briefing at the U.S. Department of State by its spokesman Ned Price. At the same time, he also explained what he means. If Lukashenko decides to bring his troops into the territory of Ukraine, the Joe Biden administration will immediately impose sanctions against Belarus. He also stressed that Washington continues to be in close contact with the Ukrainian leadership in order to effectively help us fight Russian aggression. And now we are joined by the deputy head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, Pavel Latushka, to talk more about Belarus, Russia, Alexander Lukashenko, and, of course, Ukraine. Mr. Latushka, greetings and thanks for joining us.
Приветствую вас.
So my first question to you will be as follows. Will there be an attack against Ukraine from the territory of Belarus?
For
the time being, we see and we observe a pretty active stage for the preparation of a possible aggression from the territory of Belarus. There are constant military trainings on the territory of Belarus, and the grouping of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of Belarus is increasing. Right now, the mobilization is actually suspended, or the preliminary military registration, and also right now it is just about to press certain button. We see that certain equipment has been sent to the military base, and right now Lukashenko assists Putin from the territory of Belarus to build up the opportunity of the possible invasion. The question of invasion, this is the question of future, and this scenario is pretty real because Putin is interested to use the strategic position of Belarus in the war against Ukraine, and Lukashenko is a puppet of Putin and will carry out every his order. And moreover, during the last visit of Putin to Minsk, Putin paid him dearly billions of US dollars.
Do you have the facts that Mr. Putin has already paid Lukashenko so much money?
During this visit, the main topic, public topic, was that behind the closed doors, the main topic was the military and political situation and the usage of the Lukashenko's regime and the territory of Belarus for the further aggression. We have heard that the Lukashenko's regime wants to have gas out of Russia at the cost $60–80 USD. It's a rough estimate, but I think that it is pretty close to the real one as compared to the thousands of dollars Europe is paying. And also there was certain confirmation from Putin on the building up of the Belarusian nuclear power plant affirmed by Putin, and one block has already been built by the credit money of Russia, from Russia. And actually this loan period has been prolonged because we also see that Lukashenko has the opportunity to have limitless access to the market of Russian Federation. Also another project of the import exchanging amounted at $1.9 billion of the military sector of Belarus. And right now, actually, you have seen what Putin has brought to Belarus. And certain Western politologists think that actually Putin paid billions of dollars. What for? Yes, Putin paid this price for the readiness of Lukashenko to enter into war, to open borders, to give his territories, to wage the war in Ukraine, and again to try to invade Kyiv again.
What, or maybe whom, is Lukashenko afraid of right now?
Lukashenko is afraid, first of all, to lose his power. Power is everything he holds, it's his locomotive, and this is what he wants to possess till his dying day. Of course, we understand that Putin is afraid of Belarusian people, Belarusian society, and because of this, up till now, he hasn't made his mind in order to appoint his armed forces on the territory of Ukraine, not because he is being pressed by Putin, but actually I reject the thesis that Lukashenko is somehow looping around. Yes, he roams around Putin and Putin. It means that Lukashenko wants to receive more economic bonuses from Putin in exchange of the support of the strategic goals of Russia in the war in Ukraine. Therefore, right now, his main fear as of today, if Belarusian armed forces will go into Ukraine, there will be lots of corpses. It will trigger certain reaction. Is it necessary for Putin right now to make Lukashenko send his troops in Ukraine? And my answer is no, because if this happens, there will be pre-revolutionary crisis in Belarus, and this crisis will need to be fought by Putin as well. Therefore, right now, this is not scenario, and I think that the politologists that assume this scenario, they are mistaken, because we understand that if there will be more larger grouping at the territory of Belarus, this will be the condition.
So you have already started to talk about the possible crisis in Belarus. So my last question to you will be about this crisis. But let us first hear what the spokesman of the State Department of the United States of America, Ned Price, said, and then I will ask a question.
The reported claim from President Putin that he has no intention of, as you said, absorbing anyone in his talks with Lukashenko. Look, I think a statement like that has to be treated as the height of irony, coming from a leader who is seeking, at the present moment, right now, to violently absorb his other peaceful next-door neighbor. We saw Russian forces mass inside what should have been sovereign Belarusian territory. We've seen attacks launched from what should be sovereign Belarusian territory. And now we hear these comments from President Putin and from Lukashenko. But I think the track record speaks much louder than anything these two leaders could say.
So, Mr. Latushko, my last question to you is as follows. When will Belarusians overthrow Lukashenko and regain their independence? I mean true independence, not the one Lukashenko is always talking about.
Я считаю, что может
I
быть два
think that
сценария, на
there
которые
can
также
be
стоило бы
possible
обратить
two
внимание
scenarios,
нашим
and we have to
западным
pay our
партнерам.
attention to them,
Изменение
as well as
ситуации
our
в
Western
Беларуси – это
partners.
прежде
Of
всего в
course, the
руках
changing
самих
of the
белорусов.
situation in
Но
Belarus
я считаю, что
is
тот
in
факт,
hands of the
что
Belarusians.
сегодня не
But I think that the
осуществляется
fact that
давление
right
в
now
отношении режима Лукашенко,
there is right
не
now
вводятся
no
санкции,
pressure,
санкции
no sanctions as
непропорциональны в
such
отношении России, гораздо меньше,
in the
создает ему
Belarusian
бонусы,
society, and
возможность быть
Russia makes
контрабандистом
certain
21
bonuses
века.
for Lukashenko to be the certain smuggler of the 21st century. If there was bigger pressure on Lukashenko, if there was certain direction for him to Hague, there will be certain chances for the Belarusian people to overthrow regime earlier than it happens in Russia. If West cannot cope with a small dictator, is it possible for the West to cope with a bigger one? And the second scenario, which is more probable, and I would like again to highlight the first scenario as well, the second scenario is what we believe and what we support. This is the victory of Ukraine, and our volunteers, Belarusian military unions, they also fight within armed forces of Ukraine. And we understand that the victory of Ukraine is really, really important for us to change the situation in our country. But we also have to use three factors. The first one, this is the internal underground movement, and we are working on it. The second factor is to have certain pro-armed forces within the military armed forces of Ukraine. And the third factor, this is international acknowledgement of the Unified Transitional Committee of Belarus. These are three main pillars that we can stand on and change the situation in Belarus in future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. This was Pavel Latushka, the deputy head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus. And now we are joined by Colonel Gintaras Bagdonas, former head of Lithuania's military intelligence. Mr. Bagdonas, greetings and thanks for joining.
Yeah, good evening. Good to attend.
Mr. Bagdonas, let's just hear what Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, said, and then I will ask you a question.
So we should not underestimate Russia. Russia is planning for a long war, and actually we also see that they are trying to, after have lost the momentum for some months, they are now trying to regroup, to repair, to enable them to launch new offensives.
Jens Stoltenberg said this a few days ago in his interview to the French television. And in one of your interviews, I mean recent interviews, you said that Ukraine will win by the end of 2023. Why do you think so?
Yeah, I have no doubt about this, that Ukraine will win the war, the victory will be achieved by Ukraine in a military way by the end of next year. Most likely, I should carefully to add, most likely by the end of next year. Well, and I do agree with Mr. Stoltenberg's statement saying that we should not underestimate Russia. Even from former military officer, I can say that it's very, very bad to underestimate opponent, enemy. Yeah, but my judgment is based on the first of all on the will to find of Ukrainian nation, of Ukrainian people. Another, of course, Russia is another factor. Russia is exhausted. It's already exhausted. However, there we have to be also careful with our assessment of Russian capabilities. Russia still has a huge reserves. For instance, even in open sources, you can see they have roughly about 10,000 tanks in stocks in reserve. Most likely, 2/3 are rusted, not capable. But even then, from 3 tanks you may produce one capable, one operational tank. So it's a huge forces. They have a lot of personnel. The good news that Russian soldiers are basically fighting without any motivation. And if we, even theoretically, if we take what is the war? War is a fight of 2 wills. Of war is a battle of 2 wills. And then when we compare your nation, I recently visited Ukraine. I saw a number of many men and women, soldiers and civilians. And I saw determination. I had strong determination and absolute belief. No one doubts about the victory. So how can I?
But Mr. Bogdanovich,
have another. Yes, please.
Yes, but Mr. Bogdanovich, at the same time, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhny, he warned that there's going to be another offensive, especially to Kyiv, in February and March 2023. Do you believe that Russian army can be able to launch a new offensive?
I do understand what most likely General Zaluzhny, who is very talented military strategist, of course, an excellent chief of defense. But what he said, most likely, I take a liberty to say, he wanted to encourage partner allies to provide with the military support, bigger military support for the victory. But also, as good soldier, you always have to have take in account the least, at least the least possible, but the most dangerous course of action. Most dangerous course of action, of course, what has been said by General Zaluzhny. But I don't think that even Russians, they are serious about the objective aim, military aim to take Kyiv or even any other city. What they can do, Russians, in my modest opinion, they can launch another, and they most likely they will do another military operation in order having the aim to attract your forces from the counter-offensive, from the on the areas where you may liberate whenever it takes, to distract your army, your armed forces. They may do, but assessing the qualitative status of Russian armed forces, I'm very skeptical about Russia.
And it's good for us. Mr. Bogdanovich, is there a possibility that Russia can at least somehow involve NATO into this war?
Little possibility. Firstly, do we like or not? But NATO. It's when we talk NATO, we have to think and to speak about the NATO nations. NATO, nothing more than NATO nations. So there is no single NATO, even no single nation within the alliance which would like to be engaged in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I would put comma, unless the NATO, unless there's red line crossed by Russia. Mm-hmm. For instance, nuclear weapons, tactical usage of nuclear weapons. Then I most likely.
Most likely. And what's your modest opinion, as you've just said, are NATO and Western countries helping Ukraine enough to win this war?
Today morning I was listening very impressive and strong speech of your president, of true leader, President Zelensky, in the Congress of United States. where he delivered very, very strong message that Ukraine lives, Ukraine fights, but Ukraine also has to win the war. And what we do understand that there's not enough military assistance provided by partners. And you mentioned it just recently, General Zaluzhny's interview to The Economist, where he very clearly stated what he needs. 300, at least 300 or about tanks, 500 or a bit more APCs and artillery systems and so on there. So definitely, what is behind you? Perhaps you will ask me why this support is not coming. And I think one of the biggest issue, partners, allies, or political leaders of the countries, they are afraid of escalation. They don't want to be engaged in the war. Simply, they're afraid of escalation. That's the major obstacle for more decisive actions in providing required military assistance.
Mr. Bagdonas, my last question to you will be as follows. What will be left of Russia after victory?
Oh, your question worth of million, actually. And on the other hand, I think what makes worry many partners, many our Western friends, especially in Western Europe and even in the United States, they feel, I would not say they're scared of future dissolute Russia, but they feel uncomfortable with uncertainty in Russia. Everything might happen, but what I wish, the ideal course of action, if Russia Federation, if we call it federation, well, if it loses the seat in Security Council, then of course somehow Russia has to be dearmed of its military, of its nuclear weapons. Yeah, and of course Russia has to be forced to leave all illegally occupied all its troops from, of course, firstly Ukraine, but not only, and Georgia and Moldova and the gangs of Wagner teams. They have to leave Africa contingent, Latin America, and so on. The issue is the broader Western countries have to come with a strategy how to contain Russia after the victory of Ukraine. Otherwise, it is just a matter of time when it will recover and it become even more aggressive.
Thank you very much, Colonel. This was Gintaras Bagdonas, former head of Lithuania's military intelligence. Thank you very much for your insights. How better help Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression? This is what leaders of the Joint Expeditionary Force nations were discussing in the capital of Latvia, Riga, on Monday. In a joint statement issued after the meeting, the GEF leaders commit to providing further political, military, humanitarian and economic support to Ukraine as long as necessary. Ukraine's victory is essential for the security of us all, they said. We denounced Russia's attacks on critical national infrastructure, which have been staged to terrorize Ukraine's residents, the GEF leaders said in the statement. And this is what Prime Minister of Great Britain said about the possibility of negotiations with Russia.
We must be clear that any unilateral call for a ceasefire by Russia is completely meaningless in the current context. I think it would be a false call. It would be used by Russia to regroup, to reinforce their troops, and until they have withdrawn from conquered territory, there can and should be no real negotiation.
And so, Volodymyr, I must admit this is a good news for us. No negotiations with Russia and a lot of weapons from our allies and partners. And at the very end, I just want to greet our Western friends with Christmas. May the Christmas season bring only happiness and joy to your countries, you and your families. May it bring enduring peace to Europe in general, in Ukraine in particular. May it bring victory of light over the darkness. Thank you on behalf of all Ukrainians for the help and support. Merry Christmas. And this is all for today in my part of Spotlight Ukraine. More next week. See you next week. And now back to you, Volodymyr.
You've brought just not the insights from the global news, but the smell of the tangerines in expectation of the Christmas Eve and the Christmas festive. Thank you so much.
I tried.
Thank you. Yuri Fizer, our global news editor, with some insights from the global news spotlight in Ukraine. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.